Oh, good, you made it. I thought the weather might have kept you away. As you can see, I'm just sorting some clothes, but that's okay. You can come and sit by my fire, and we'll have some great stories and some great times on today's episode of Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. So, get situated, and let's listen to some great stories while you warm up a little bit before I have to kick you back out again. This first story is about one of our channel's most loved and feared cryptids. It's certainly a cryptid that kept me in line when I was a kid, growing up in northern Florida. So, let's take a little time today and learn a bit more about Soap Sally. The storm was one of epic proportions. It closed the schools for 3 weeks, right up until Christmas break. 4 days before Christmas, that was when I met her. Better not stay out too late or Soap Sally'll get ya. Mom called this after me, right as I went out the door to go play with Rob and Terrell. I rolled my eyes, slipping on my mittens as I grabbed my sled from behind the door. Sure, Mom, I'll be sure to watch out for Soap Sally. That was always what my mom told me. Her little attempt to scare me when I was a kid, I think. When I was younger, 4 or 5 maybe, Mom would use it to make sure I was inside before the street lights came on. I remember the first time she ever said it to me, the moment ingrained in my brain forever. I was heading out to play in the sandbox in the front yard, something Dad had spent all day building on his day off, and she had offhandedly told me to make sure I was in before the street lights came on, or Soap Sally would take me away. I had stopped, a little pale and shovel in my hand, and asked her who Soap Sally was. My mother just shrugged and said it was something her mother had always said, and the two of us had used it as our kind of personal joke from then on. Better get the groceries in before dark, Mom would say. Soap Sally might get you. Better hurry up and take the trash out, Mom would say. I think I hear Soap Sally prowling around. We'd done it for so long, it was just kind of normal. But I wasn't a baby anymore. I was 12, and I knew Soap Sally was just a boogeyman that adults used to scare kids. She was no more real than the Wampus Cat, another of my mother's colorful stories, and I put it out of my mind as I ran to join the others. Terrell had told us that his brother had told him about a big hill near Basker's Pond. It's so steep that when you come down it, you almost fly, he said. So I trudged through the fresh powder, over the streets that no longer looked like streets at all, and made my way towards the edge of town. My hometown isn't very big, one of those 2 stoplights and a gas station kind of places you always drive through on your way somewhere else. There were maybe 20 kids my age in town, and our whole school could have probably fit in your graduating class. We knew we were living in a podunk town in the Georgia hills, and most of us dreamed about getting out after high school and doing anything but staying here. For some of us, that dream was actually realized. For others, the cemetery was all we had to look forward to. I met Terrell near Basker's Field, a small little picnic area that butted up against Basker's Pond. The pond wasn't huge, but it was a great place to swim and fish in the summertime, and just, kind of enjoy yourself. Today, however, it was a winter wonderland of fresh snow and chilling wind. Terrell was bundled up to the eyebrows in a thick ski jacket, and his snow pants had little rolls in them that made him look a little like the Michelin Man. He, too, was clutching a battered old sled, and when he spoke, I could see the air puffing from his mouth, even under his hood. "'Bout time. Where's Rob?" That was when we heard a loud yell from up the road, and Rob came running with a banana-yellow disc under his arm. He was wearing a matching ski suit and a pair of thick snow boots that seemed to be the only thing he wore that wasn't yellow. His voice cut through the sound of the wind like a foghorn, and I wondered if we were the only people in town not inside right now. It was a little spooky, even in the middle of the day. "Took you long enough," Terrell said. "Are you ready to sled?" "If this hill is half as cool as you say it is, T, then I'm ready to sled till midnight," Rob said excitedly. With that, we set off. We had all seen the hill in question. Overlook Crest was the place to spread your blanket on the 4th of July to watch the fireworks, or to picnic on, or to just sit and watch the boats as they went out there fishing during the warm months. It offered a great view of the water, and as we trudged up it, the hill felt twice as steep as usual. The snow made it slippery, and the 3 of us were laughing and pushing as we reached the top. Terrell won, of course. Terrell was a beefy kid, and he was harder to push down than Rob, who was mostly skin and bones. He set his sled against the snow, and when he slid down, he really did seem to fly. We spent the day on the hill, sledding, snowball fighting, making snowmen, and generally enjoying the day. Blizzards like these were rare, And we'd been having a lot of days like this where we were just free to be kids and enjoy our childhood. Sometimes we linked up with others from school to have snowball fights or play games, but mostly it was just Terrell and Rob, and me, of course, enjoying the childhood we had before it was over. We had all expected it to end when we went to high school, the dying place of childish things, and not one of us could have guessed that it might be something childish that ended our innocence. I didn't notice it was getting dark until the streetlights came on and sent a dazzle of diamonds up from the snow. Ah, crap. Mom's going to be mad if I'm late. Oh, relax, Rob said. It's not like we have school tomorrow. As long as you're home before bedtime, why would she care? Rob's parents were never home, leaving him in the care of his aunts or his grandmother since they worked late. Terrell and I, however, had mothers and fathers who would expect us home when the streetlights came on, and I could see Terrell shuffling nervously too. We were all poised at the top of the hill, preparing to race to the bottom, and when Rob saw our looks, he rolled his eyes and jumped. "Last one to the bottom is a baby," he sing-songed. We all jumped then, putting on a burst of speed as we tried to catch him. As we came down, I began to hear a strange noise, the rumble of something rolling down the street, the jingle of an almost merry bell, and the hum of a gravelly voice. I looked around, trying to find the source of the noise, and that's when I saw her walk under a streetlight. It was an old woman, pushing a wheelbarrow or a small cart. We were heading right for her, and Rob was turned around backwards so he could laugh and mug at us. "Rob, look out!" He turned just in time to smack face first into the cart. We swerved to a stop, Terrell and I running down the hill the rest of the way. We could already see the old lady bending over him to inspect the prone boy, and under the glare of the streetlights, he looked pretty bad. There was a big gash on his forehead, the blood leaving red streaks down his yellow ski suit. Rob was groaning when we approached, and the woman looked up at us, smiling feebly as she rose to her full height. She was as wide as she was tall, and she was nearly 6 feet. She wore a voluminous black dress, her hair caught in a scarf or a kerchief that trapped it against her head. Her hands were liver-spotted, her fingers long and spidery as they sank back into her sleeves. The cart she was pushing seemed to be empty, and I figured she was on her way to pick something up when we bumped into her. There was a bell attached to it, and Rob flopped back against it, making it tinkle merrily. "Dear me, I didn't see you there, son. Are you okay?" she said in her thin, spidery voice. We helped Rob to his feet, but he was shaky and hardly able to stand. I was worried that maybe he had a concussion, maybe even a broken skull, and I wanted to help him get to the house as quickly as I could. Terrell asked the woman if we could borrow her cart, but she said she needed it later and couldn't loan it out. "But I'll help you get back to my cottage so you can call for help. I'll make you something warm to drink while you call your parents and let them know what happened. Put him in the cart now. You can help me push him back to my house." I was hesitant. Mom was always clear on not taking rides from strangers, and certainly not going to their house. But Rob groaned and wobbled then, which made up my mind. Our town was so small, after all. We may have never seen this lady before, but there was very little chance that she would want to hurt us, right? No one ever wanted to hurt us, and despite all the lessons about stranger danger, we had never even heard of anyone getting kidnapped. We loaded Rob into the wagon, the bell jingling as he slid in, and pushed it back the way we had come. As it turned out, the woman lived in the woods behind Basker's Park. The tires rumbled over the wood chips that led to her house, and Rob groaned as we jostled him in the cart. We had left our sleds behind, and we moved unburdened towards the dark little cabin at the end of the long road. It looked spooky at night, not a candle or a light inside. "You can push him right in the front door," she gravelled out. As we neared, something screamed at me not to go inside that house, though. Common sense seemed to have reasserted itself, and when I paused on the steps to the front porch, the old woman and Terrell barely noticed. As the door came open, I could smell something like wax melting, a warm, aromatic smell of tallow. There were floral smells as well, and something akin to the cooking of bacon fat. There was another smell, though, something that prickled the hairs on the back of my neck, a coppery smell, a wet smell. And when I took a step back, the old woman seemed to notice that I hadn't come inside. She turned in the doorway, and we made eye contact for a few seconds before she asked why I wasn't coming in. I just remembered that I thought of something, anything, and landed on a flimsy lie. "My dad, he's coming to pick us up, and if he gets there and we're gone, he'll be worried. I probably need to. I turned to go back down the cedar path, but suddenly her hand was around my wrist. I felt my breath catch as I looked down at those long, spidery fingers. The bones creaked beneath her skin, and the flesh around them was so thin that I imagined I could see them through the pale wrapper. As firm as her grip was, her skin was waxy and slick. It reminded me of nothing so much as candle wax, heated tallow, and when I looked into her face, I could see nothing human there. Her face looked like an exceptionally well-crafted mask, a mask made of human skin. "Come inside," she whispered, and I could see that her mask bore too much makeup. She had really caked it on, and it made her look almost clownish. Whoever had applied it roughly. Her eyes were like black pits beneath all that dark eyeshadow. I whispered, my tongue now dry as it battered against my chapped lips. "I just need to tell my dad where Your father can't help you now," she breathed, grinning with her mouth full of gravestone teeth. "Don't worry. You'll see him very soon." She yanked my arm then, and I saw my one chance to escape. I pulled back hard, nearly toppling her from the porch, my arm slipping out of her greasy grip. I was running flat out as she cawed angrily behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached my house. My mom was waiting for me on the porch, looking angry as I came running up. She asked what I thought I was doing out so late. She asked if I meant to meet Soap Sally, as she always joked about. She asked me if I intended to freeze to death out in the snow. All those questions went unanswered. All her anger disappeared as I wrapped my arms around her and told her that some old lady had taken Terrell and Rob. She called the police, but seemed angry when she hung up. She told me that they must have thought she was someone pulling a prank. They told her that they would get right on that, and the next time Soap Sally came after her to make sure there was less than a foot of snow on the ground. She sent me to bed, but my dreams were full of the old woman and her deep, pitiless eyes. In my dreams, she got me. In my dreams, she cackled as she peeled my skin. I woke up the next day to hear Mom on the phone with Terrell's mom. "He came home in a state last night. Said some lady had Terrell, just like I told you last night. Didn't you find anything? I'll ask him once he gets up. If he comes home, let me know, please." She hung up the phone and came to talk to me. The police came by later that day to question me. I guess they were taking the disappearance of 2 children a little more seriously now. I told them exactly what I had told my mom. Rob had hit his head, and the old lady had offered to help us. We put him in the cart and pushed him to her house. I got spooked and tried to run, but she grabbed me. I got free and ran to the house. I told my mom what had happened, and she called the police, but they didn't believe her. It seemed like they were interested in this house now and asked me to take them there. I gave them directions, but I refused to go anywhere near that place. They came back later and told me that the house appeared to have been abandoned for years and asked me if I was sure. I told them I was, and they said all they had found was a bit of dried blood and a black dress that might fit a horse. They didn't believe me, that much was apparent, but they believed me after the soap arrived. I woke up one morning about a week after Rob and Terrell disappeared and walked downstairs to the smell of breakfast. Mom was making flapjacks and bacon, and the smell turned my stomach a little as the familiar odors assaulted my nose. To this day, the smell of hot fat makes me want to puke, and the smell of it always takes me back to that house and that day. "Sweetie, could you bring the milk in off the front porch?" I looked outside. "Snow's 3 feet deep, Mom. I doubt the milkman ran today." "Well, I heard someone on the porch a few minutes ago. They left something and didn't knock. See if it's the milk before it freezes, please." Sitting on the mat was a small wicker basket. Sitting on a bed of black cloth were square packages wrapped in wax paper. I felt my breath hitch as I saw the cloth, but tried to shake it off. What didn't remind me of the old woman in the woods these days? I reached down to pick up the package and felt the semi-solid brick of soap as it smooshed a little between my fingers. I unwrapped it, not sure who would leave soap on the doorstep, and that's when I saw the note. It was under the soap, written in a long, spidery hand, and the words sent a shudder through me that the winter chill couldn't top. "See you soon." I felt the soap slip from my numb fingers. When it hit the boards, I looked down and saw something that pushed a scream up my throat. It was a bone. a finger bone. The police told my dad that it was Rob's finger bone, but they found trace evidence of Terrell's bones in the other bar of soap. Both their parents had received similar baskets of soap, and, unfortunately, Rob's grandmother had brought it out of the bathroom when the police came to check. She had been washing her hands with it all day, having no clue that she was washing her hands with her grandson's body. My own grandmother came to visit a few days later. She and Mom had a long talk about something, and I got the feeling that Mom didn't want her to tell me something. As she shuffled to my room, I couldn't help but shudder as I imagined my door opening to reveal a huge woman in a black dress and a shawl leering at me as she smiled with her witch's grin. When Grandma knocked, I told her to come in. She sat down on the bed and seemed to think about what she meant to say. "I grew up in this town, too. You know that. One night, my friend Grace and I were late coming home from a church dance. We cut through the park, and as we passed by the sign that said, 'Welcome to Basker's Park,' we saw an old woman who was trying to fix her cart. She asked us to help her get the cart to her house, and we obliged. No sooner had I seen her house, though, than I got a tickling feeling. My mother had told me about Soap Sally, too, and I suddenly realized what the smell was around that cart. It was tallow and lye and blood. I ran as quick as I could, and I never saw my friend again. You got real lucky, kiddo, but don't press your luck by being careless," she said, giving me a little hug as her bones creaked in that way that Soap Sally's had. She left me then, and we never spoke about it again. That was 5 years ago. 5 long winters ago. The snow is back, and the days are short, but I haven't left my house after dark, not since that night I lost my best friends. Though I never saw her again, I know she has seen me. Sometimes I hear the grumble of that cart, the tinkle of the bell, and it sends me running home as surely as it did the night I escaped her. My greatest fear is that she will make good on her threat one day. One day, Soap Sally may leave me on my parents' front porch, their missing son unknowingly come home. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Darn, I could have swore I had more boxers than this. Oh well, I'm sure they'll turn up later. Oh, sorry, I was talking to myself there. Let's move on to another story, and this one is an oldie, but definitely a goodie. I can speak from experience that a lot of odd things sometimes go on in the mind of an artist, but the subject of today's story has a little bit more going on than even I can take credit for. But nonetheless, let's delve in and see what lies in the mind of an artist. Oh, good. You're awake. Don't struggle too much. I know what this looks like, but I promise I'm not going to kill you. Your rope's too tight? I can loosen them a little. Sadly, the gag has to stay on. You see, I can't have you interrupting me while I create my masterpiece, or while I tell you how we came to be here. Do you recognize me? No? Maybe you're not an art lover. My name is Roland DePriest, and I'm a world-renowned artist. My work has been seen in galleries, museums, and was once the showcase of any place it was housed. The critics said my eye for color and my ability to capture the human condition in a simple brushstroke was astonishing, even peerless. I had the ear of the world, and whatever I painted turned to gold. It was to be expected, of course. Are you sure your hands aren't too tight? I can loosen them a little. Well, all right, if you're sure. I'd offer you something to drink, but all I have is wine, and I dare say it might react badly to the sedatives I gave you earlier. Come on, don't act upset. I told you I'm not going to hurt you. Where was I? Ah, my rise to fame. My genius was to be expected, after all. From a young age, I showed sublime talent with the brush. I had an eye for detail, and a notable presence on the canvas. I was soon invited to study at some of the greatest art schools in the world, where my talent was honed and molded by some of the greatest artistic minds of our time. I debuted my first serious piece when I was 13 years old. By the time I was 14, I had my first gallery showing, and for my 18th birthday, I was honored to have one of my paintings hung in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, alongside the greatest works of our time. It didn't stop there, though. My work was hung in the Louvre in France, the Acropolis Museum in Greece, and even the Prada in Madrid. Every serious art critic said they wished they could see in my mind so they might glimpse my genius firsthand. For several years, I was the toast of the art world. Sadly, though, it only made my fall more spectacular. What? What's wrong? Why do you look so scared? Oh, but of course, I guess it's a little disconcerting to see a man who's kidnapped you holding a gun. Don't weep so. Tonight, this gun is my brush, and the walls of this basement are my canvas. For the love of God, stop struggling. Tonight, you're going to be part of history, and you're shaking and flailing like I'm a wild animal. Now you've made me lose my train of thought. Where was I? Ah, yes, my fall from grace. It wasn't a lapse in my talent, you understand. My genius never wavered. But these Philistines grew bored with my work. The critics, men who had once praised me as a genius, now saw my art as overdone, reminiscent of earlier works. They wrote articles about how I had peaked at 20, about how I should be proud of my accomplishments, how I should cease to embarrass myself by continuing this sad campaign. They, again, wrote how they wished they could get a look inside my head, the mind of the artist, so they could see where it all went so wrong. I tried modern art, living art, interpretive art, but it all amounted to the same thing. The loving eye of the public had turned from me. And now, it's come to this. Why do you continue to struggle and weep? I've already told you that I'm not going to hurt you. No. Your job is to tell the world about my latest work. You're the herald of my genius, and you must tell the art world what I cannot. Listen to the sound the cylinder makes when I spin it. Such a smooth sound, isn't it? You see, my friend, I've decided to give the art community just what it always wanted. If they want to see what's inside the mind of an artist so badly, then they're going to love my last piece. Ah, there they are. I can hear the sirens outside now. I called the police 10 minutes ago, told them where to find us. It will take them another few minutes to break down the door and make their way to the basement. But it'll be too late by then. I'm going to remove your gag now, so you can help them discover my latest art piece. And remember, a call the mind of an artist. That looks like just about all the blue jeans. Man, I've got enough blue jeans over here to bankroll a Russian monarchy. But let's move into another story, and this one, and that's saying something for this channel, is a little weird. I don't know how much you've traveled, but this is a part of Arizona I've certainly never been to. But let's learn a little bit more about Courtenay, Arizona, and their mysterious metal man. I'm a cop in Nevada, for a tiny town of less than 1,000. Courtenay, Nevada doesn't actually have a police force. The mayor is usually whoever's soberest at election time, and it's made up of retirees and people trying not to be noticed. It lies between Austin and Eureka, and the whole town is managed by a single officer. Me. I live in Eureka, but 3 months out of the year, I stay in the dingy little Palmer Inn and operate the emergency phone system. It routes to my cell phone, and when I'm not out on a call, I can be found in my room, watching TV. The Palmer actually gets really good satellite TV. You probably think it sounds like a post from hell, but the crime rate in Courtney is next to nothing. I've been doing this on and off for about 3 years, and I think I've only had to reach for my gun twice in that time. We do 3 months on, and then swap with another officer for 3 months. But sometimes I'll just do 6 months in a row. Courtney is as peaceful as a town full of oldsters and whatever else can be. After tonight, however, I'm not sure I can look at the place the same way again. I'm trying to write up paperwork now, but I'm just not sure what to say. There's no way they'll believe the truth, but I swear it's what happened. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. I'm hoping that if I write it out here, then it might be easier to explain to my supervisor. I was sitting out on the town line with my radar gun at about 10:30 at night, when the quiet town suddenly got less quiet. So the only thing really to do in Courtney to justify me being there is to catch speeders on Highway 50. The speed zone changes from 65 to 35 in the course of a mile, and the number of drivers that seem to think they can just blow through the little town doing 60 is way too damn high. I had a rig of my own invention that held the speed gun up to the window, and as good a hiding place as I could behind an old billboard, leaving me basically unseen and my hands free to watch whatever on my phone. I had foregone the adventures of Luffy and the crew in favor of a new horror podcast, and I was getting comfy when something hit the ground hard enough to rock my cruiser in its frame. My phone fell into the floorboard about a second before the speed gun came down to hit me on the head, and I came out of my car rubbing my scalp and cussing like a sailor. I got out and looked across the street, seeing heat shimmers as something cooled in the desert nearby. The oldsters who lived here had told me that meteors were sometimes seen falling out into the desert, but this one had damn near taken my cover out. I had never seen a meteor up close, not unless you count the ones at the museum that my school had drugged the class to when I was a kid, and I was interested in getting a good look. It would be kinda cool to see something that had been cruising through space until a few minutes ago, and I made my way across the road and towards the crater. I was still in the road when, to my surprise, I heard the sound of metal grating against itself. I could see the top of something dark as it rose from the lip of the crater, and the top was still glowing from its entry through the atmosphere. The hole wasn't terribly deep, but this would have still been taller than me by a foot. Would have been a shame if one of those aforementioned speeders had come blowing through while not paying attention, 'cause I would have been roadkill. I was about 60 feet from it, but it looked like one of those NASA spacesuits, except made out of silver. When it moved, it was the herky-jerky kind of steps of a sci-fi robot. You know, the ones you might see in a 50s movie. It slipped in the sand a little, but managed to find its footing as it made its slow way out of the crater. If it noticed me, it gave no sign, and when it came to the top of the hole, it turned and started making its way for town. I hadn't noticed before it got on solid ground, probably because the sand was running down to quench it, but when it stepped, its footsteps left little fires behind. It made it easier to follow, and as I went back to the cruiser to get my radio, I realized I had no one to call right about the time I keyed up the mic. I was here by myself. I was the law in Courtney, and it was up to me to do something about this. I dropped the handset and climbed in instead, keying the engine as I pulled out and followed the strange creature that had crashed randomly on the outskirts of the little burg. It wasn't hard to follow him. His feet left little fires behind him, and his pace was slow, as if he weren't really in a hurry, as he made his way closer and closer to town. Watching him go, I wasn't really sure what to do with him if I tried to stop him. Could he be stopped with anything in my car? I had a shotgun, my sidearm, and a couple of those flashbangs we used on large groups of people. None of that seemed like it would do much against this metal man who was slowly making his way through the desert. Watching him move was like watching a stop-motion short. He was kind of a strange automaton, A metal man whose skin was still slightly red from his fall from space. Instead of pulsing and burning, as his steps had, he seemed to shimmer like a heat reflection. He didn't seem lost, his pilgrimage definitely going in a certain direction, and as the lights of the quick fill broke the darkness with their phosphorescent intrusion, I began to get a little nervous. The quick fill was a 24/7 gas station that boasted 12 gas pumps and a huge underground holding tank. God only knew what would happen if this thing set fires that went down to the reserve tank. I whipped into the parking lot as I popped the trunk and grabbed my shotgun. It had buckshot in it, a higher caliber than the 9mm slug in my Glock, and when I hefted it, it felt like I had 4 shells ready and waiting. There was a box of 12 in the trunk, and I put them in my jacket pocket before chambering around and taking the safety off. I didn't know what this thing was capable of, but I knew I couldn't let it menace my town. "You, all right, Sheriff?" Came a shaky voice from the door of the quick fill, and it startled me enough to almost make me drop my shotgun. Clyde Haggerty, the 19-year-old kid who ran the register at the quick fill after 10:30 p.m., looked pretty scared. He had probably watched me come screeching in, pop the trunk, and go digging for my shotgun, wondering what the hell was going on. In his mind, it was probably robbers or dopers, but he had no clue what was coming out of the desert for him. I didn't want him to see this thing suddenly vaporize me with a death ray or something, and when I turned towards him, he jumped back a little as the barrel of my shotgun flagged him. "Go get yourself somewhere safe, Clyde. Something's heading your way, and I don't want you to get mixed up with it." Clyde nodded, and I heard the door click as he went back inside. Hopefully, he was hiding in the cooler or something. I turned back to find the creature lumbering closer, its distance now about 50 feet from me. The shotgun wouldn't do much at that range, but that would give me enough time to follow protocol and give it a warning before opening fire. "Stop! I'm an officer of the Eureka Police Department, and I'm ordering you to halt and state your intent." The creature didn't even pause, just kept its course as it made for the gas station. "Stop! This is your final order to stop, or I will open fire." It was well within range now, the fires burning behind it, making it hard to miss, and when I squeezed the trigger, the gun bucked as the shot slammed into it. The metal man never slowed in his pursuit, and as I loaded another round, it was now about 20 feet from me. "Stop!" I yelled, squeezing the trigger and pumping a new shell into the barrel as the old one thundered forth. A third shot let fly a second later, but if the creature was even registering them, it never showed it. It kept coming as I fed new shells into the gun, and as I slid the fourth into the receiver, I felt a sudden and excruciating heat. It was like standing too close to a bonfire, and as I stumbled away from the thing, I looked up to find that it was within 10 feet of me. It appeared that it was still very hot, and its skin radiated an intense heat that the sand had done nothing to quench. I yelped again as my fingers blistered, and I realized the gun was soaking up as much heat as I was. I tossed it down, and not a moment too soon either. The bullets in the weapon began to erupt, sending the shotgun flying apart. As I turned away and covered my face just in time, I caught some shrapnel in the arm and a little in the back, but I was spared the worst of it. As it lumbered past, I tossed the shells out too, lobbing them as far as I could manage before they went off as well. Even so, I was reminded of a time as a kid when I'd reached for something underneath the radiator while it was still on. Even though I'd been careful not to touch it with my face or hands, I could still feel that heat coming off of it as I stretched for a toy that I had lost under there. It was like that now, except this thing was a walking radiator. It went right past me and towards the gas station, its course unerring. As it came around the side, I remembered another weapon at my disposal and ran back to the trunk of the cruiser. I had a fire extinguisher in there, one of the big ones that I'd needed to put out a trash fire once, and as the creature came around to the front of the store, I pulled the pin and sprayed it with a stream of foam. It coated the thing, hissing as it hit its superheated skin and sliding off like the cheese on those copper pans they're always showing on TV. It was impossible to tell if it was doing anything, but as I played it out, I heard a hellish sound coming from the front of the store. The thing had reached out and melted the glass on the double doors, walking through the hole as it went right into the quick fill. There wasn't much I could do but follow him. I didn't know where Clyde was, but I hoped that he was safe. The store looked empty as I followed at a relatively safe distance, and the front counter was vacant. It appeared that Clyde had taken me seriously, and as the creature stumbled into the little shop, I found myself spraying at fires left in its passing. He went by the chips, the candy, the snack cakes, all of them curling a little as the heat kissed them. He was making his slow way towards the drink cooler, and he seemed to be looking for something in particular. As he stood looking in, the floor bowed and sagged beneath his otherworldly warmth. I was worried that he would go right through the floor at this rate. When he reached out, slowly and deliberately, his hand melted its way into the cooler, and the puff of angry, cold air that came out was almost comical. It hissed against the creature's skin as it reached in for something, and when it came out with a bottle of Dr. Pepper, the container was already starting to warp. It tilted it towards its head, spilling the dark liquid all over itself, before reaching for another one. By the third bottle, they had stopped crumpling quite so quickly, and by the seventh it was clear that it was tossing the liquid into whatever served as its mouth. It ran through the whole row of them before starting on the Diet Dr. Peppers, and as it finished the row too, I noticed its skin was less translucent than before. Some of the heat shimmer had left it, some of the blazing warmth had dissipated. It was cooling down, and as it dropped the mostly intact bottles to the ground, it released a very human sigh of relief. Then it fell to pieces on the floor of the quick fill, its body reduced to scrap. And that was the end of my encounter. I'm still not sure what to make of all this. The creature landed on Earth, tromped through the desert, destroyed my shotgun, wrecked up the quick fill, and then drank until he turned into scrap metal. Dr. Pepper, to be exact, but who's counting? I don't know if my supervisors will accept this or not, but I do have something they can use as proof, besides the crater on the outskirts of town. Every step that he took through the desert left behind a perfect little footprint of pure glass, and the glass has a tread in it. I've saved a few of them, just in case, and Clyde has provided a witness statement as well. Apparently he was hiding in the cooler when the creature came in, and saw it drink all the Dr. Pepper before collapsing. Hopefully, that'll be enough to convince my supervisors I'm not crazy. But I hope to never have another night like that one again. Something else comes to mind too, and it makes me hesitant to go to the fridge for my favorite midnight drink of choice. If my fire extinguisher did little more than kick up steam, what's in Dr. Pepper that quenched his heat so well? This next story is about one of the scariest things out there today. Weird YouTube channels. If you've never stumbled across one, you're not looking hard enough. At least in the early days, they seemed to be everywhere. And I've seen some of them kind of make a comeback here lately. So, let's hear a fan favorite and find out a little more about the Meat Man. It started as most things do, with boredom. I was surfing around YouTube, looking for funny videos or scary videos, when I stumbled across something that caught my interest. It was run by a user who went by The Meat Man, and it involved stop-motion footage using some very disturbing puppets. The thing that honestly caught my eye first was the thumbnail. It was a figure that appeared to be crafted entirely out of ground meat. I remember seeing the model and lifting an eyebrow as I took in what I was actually seeing. Now, when I tell you that the models were grotesque, I don't mean they were ugly or badly made. They were very well put together, and the amount of detail that had gone into them was astonishing. These meat puppets had hair and clothes and facial features that had all been meticulously crafted to the point of being a little uncanny. I would have almost expected them to blink or move on their own, and they seemed too lifelike for the medium. The episode I had found was episode 5, and as I watched it, I quickly began to realize that this was no normal bit of YouTube content. Episode 5 involved 3 characters, Lisa, Steve, and Michael, as they prepared for the arrival of a 4th character, Dawn. The background music was jangly and discordant, somewhere between a calliope and a merry-go-round, and it often made the voices hard to hear. The characters were cleaning up the house, which was mostly a sheet of paper with windows drawn near the ceiling, and some furniture crafted from modeling clay. As they cleaned, a voice told us how Lisa was being lazy and expected Michael and Steve to do the majority of the work. I remember thinking that was odd because her character moved and dusted and tidied at least as much as the others did, and they seemed to be working well together. After a few minutes of herky-jerky cleaning, a hand came down from the ceiling and congratulated Steve and Michael on a job well done. It then pointed a pudgy finger at Lisa and scolded her for being so lazy. The voice said that Lisa would not be allowed to join the party later, since she hadn't helped. As Michael and Steve walked off stage, Lisa's character curled into a ball as the loud party music played in the background. I remember feeling bad for Lisa as the last frame sat frozen in place, the camera zooming in on the prostrate Lisa, as she sat hunkered against the wall. Though I couldn't hear anything over the loud party music, I could see the small figure shaking a little as though she might be crying. What the hell was this? Why did it suddenly make me feel almost voyeuristic for watching the suffering of a lumpy knot person? After that, my morbid curiosity was hooked. I went to the attached channel and saw that he had about 10 videos up, all added within the last month or so. His channel was small, only about 80 subscribers, and they were all in that same stop-motion style, where he used the figure's grotesqueness to his advantage. I found the first episode, Friendship, and decided to watch it. The video was about Lisa, the meat puppet from before, and how she was sad and lonely all by herself. The puppet mostly sat in the same familiar position, bent over and appearing to sob. Suddenly, 2 other familiar puppets, Steve and Michael, came into the scene, and Lisa seemed happy to see them. The pudgy hand, whom she called Father, said that he had seen that she was lonely and had gotten her some friends so she wouldn't cry so much. The hand stroked her delicate hair, and it seemed to be much nicer to her than it had been in the previous episode. The 3 hugged and said they would be friends forever. Then the episode ended and the screen went black. It had lasted less than 5 minutes all told, but it still made me feel strange and put off. The puppets were so odd-looking, and I just couldn't shake the feeling that there was something not right about them. I was also hooked, and immediately loaded up the second video. It was like a train wreck. I needed to see how it came out, no matter what the carnage looked like. The next 2 episodes were pretty similar to what I'd come to expect. They were called Cohabitation and Family, and followed the lives of Lisa and her new roommates. They set up some furniture and had some getting-to-know-you chatter as wonky music played in the background, making their words hard to hear sometimes. It was the typical stop-motion fare, but there were odd refrains sometimes in the middle of the stop-motion. During one in particular, the boys, Steve and Michael, were talking with Lisa about what they were going to make for dinner. The stop-motion abruptly cut, and you could see 5 or 6 seconds of the model just standing, as loud sobbing came from the background. Amidst that sobbing, there was a soft but angry voice trying to quiet them. I had to rewind it a few times in order to catch it, and I remember wondering if this were some sort of artistic film or something. Was the artist trying to make some kind of point? Maybe he was trying to hide it amidst the stop motion or something, make it even more artsy. It wasn't until the 4th episode that things got bad for Lisa. I noticed that while the first 3 episodes had come out one a day, the 4th video had taken almost a week to come out. This wouldn't have been strange for any other channel, but the total shift from episode 3 to episode 4 was alarming. The video was about 5 minutes long, and seemed to entail Lisa going out on her own for a night walk and getting lost. She had gone out for a walk, despite being told not to by Father Hand, and had gotten herself lost in a forest that seemed to be drawn on white paper. The trees were the big swampy kind you often saw in kids' art assignments, and it was clear that Father Hand was no artist. He wasn't a consistent narrator either, because his voice and his tone seemed to get angrier the longer the episode went on. The condition of the puppet looked ghastly, and that only added to the surreal horror of the show. The Lisa puppet was clearly in bad shape, and halfway through the show, a piece fell off of her and landed on the table. The narration ended abruptly, as the music continued over the visual of the graying puppet just standing in place. The The sound of someone stomping off was audible over the jangly Discord, and the steps sounded heavy and angry. There was a brief moment of someone begging to be let go, but it cut away just as the sound of screaming started. The video was edited poorly, and an attempt had clearly been made to cut it out. When the show resumed, the Lisa puppet was complete again, with what appeared to be a hunk of fresh meat attached. The piece that had fallen off, however, still lay on the table, as though it were no more useful than a snakeskin now. Towards the end of the episode, the Lisa puppet bent over and seemed to weep as she was alone and scared in the forest. This weeping was overlaid by a soft and frantic weeping in the background as well, though I'm not sure we were meant to hear that part. All of a sudden, the father hand came and showed her the way home. It scolded her for running away, and told her she must never do that again. Much like an actual father, the hand seemed relieved as well as angry, and the meat Lisa went with him to the house meekly enough. When they returned, the Steve and Michael puppet did not seem happy to see her. They shunned her silently, and the episode ended with Lisa crying in a corner somewhere. Then the episode faded to black, and the credits rolled. I hovered my mouse over episode 6, not sure if I really wanted to watch it. Episode 4, called Thankless, made episode 5 make a lot more sense. Father Hand was still likely punishing Lisa for running away, though the start of the episode made it very clear that Lisa had just been going out for a walk. The episodes were easy enough to follow, but something in them still made me uneasy. Why were these characters living under this supposedly fatherly Hand character? Why did the narrator call them roommates if the father Hand treated them like his children? The whole show was just odd and had a very surreal nature to it. There seemed to be an underlying story that I just wasn't getting. I was invested, though, and I had to see how it came out. Episode 6 was the strangest by far, and the comments on the video seemed to prove that I wasn't just going crazy. It was called Melancholy, and the episode started with the same weird dance music and a shot of Lisa hunched up and crying. The crying, however, was not the canned sound it had been before. The episode was 3.5 minutes of someone sobbing heartbreakingly, the kind of sobs that are equal parts hopelessness and terror. The camera seemed to be slowly panning in on the intricate face of the meat puppet as the sobs in the background went on and on. I had seen some strange videos in my time, but this one definitely took the cake. The final shot was of the eye of the meat puppet, clearly defined and lovingly traced. You could see the meat beginning to mold, see the bright splotches that decorated the surface, and just before the screen faded to black, you could hear the elevated terror in the voice of the person sobbing before it was shut off by the end of the episode. I had to take a break after that one, reading the comments as I tried to make sense of what I had just watched. The Meat Man's audience seemed to be a little divided on whether this was an artistic expression or something much darker. A user had said that the sobbing and the screaming had been unique, and that they couldn't find it anywhere online, or at least on any of the free sites. Another user questioned whether they were too real or not, thinking this might be part of someone's torture fantasy, but others seemed to think it was just an avant-garde piece, and that was a little too pompous for its own good. What they did agree on was that even if it was acting, the screams were a little too real, and that they all felt some kind of way about those cries of anguish. I had hoped that maybe episode 7 would be a return to sanity, but episode 7, called Jealousy, was just as weird. The narrator was telling us that the Dawn character was adjusting very nicely to the house. All the tenants loved her. They all wanted to be her friend. And indeed, Father Hand, Steve, and Michael were all standing around her and moving animatedly. Only one character, Lisa, didn't seem to want to be friends with Dawn. She seemed to be in another room, still hunkered up and crying. The narrator explained that Lisa was jealous of Dawn, and that Father was becoming cross with her attitude. The sobs from the previous episode were gone, but there were some other low noises, barely discernible over the loud jangling music. The puppets seemed to be in much better condition as well, and I suppose they had changed the meat out on them recently. The Father Hand came and yelled at Lisa some more, but she just stayed hunkered up and crying. Finally he left, and the episode ended as the camera zoomed in on the little meat woman hunkered in her anguish. I looked at the next episode and wondered if I really wanted to see more. It felt like I'd been watching for hours, but it turned out that all 7 episodes had taken less than 30 minutes. Something about watching the byplay between the characters had gripped me, and I felt that I needed to finish it. At the same time, there was something much darker here than I had expected. This was like someone's confession. The whole thing felt very intimate, and I felt almost voyeuristic for watching. I clicked the next episode, though, telling myself that another 3 episodes wouldn't do much damage. How wrong I'd been. Episode 8, called Hatred, opened with Lisa leaning against a paper wall as the others tried to get in her room. They started out nicely asking her to come out, wanting to talk, wanting to see her. The narrator told us that Lisa had been shirking her chores and saying unkind things to Father Hand about the other roommates. Father Hand had, of course, shared these things with the others, and now they wanted to talk to her. As their knocking became pounding, all 3 of them pushing and pulling at the door as they banged and kicked, Lisa pulled her hands to her ears and put her head between her knees. The narrator told us how Michael and Steve wanted to talk, and how Dawn was really upset that Lisa would judge her so hastily. As they pounded and banged on the paper door, Father Hand suddenly came into the scene. Lisa looked up from her knees and seemed unsure of what to make of the sudden appearance of the fatherly phalange. Father Hand told her that she had brought discord to the house, and that he could no longer ignore her insolence. The hand turned itself into a fist and began to beat the puppet savagely. Chunks of meat fell off and were squashed beneath the pounding. The wire body was twisted and warped, and the whole scene was made all the more horrific by the overlaying carnival tune that scratched like razors across my brain. It ended as Steve and Michael knocked, and the camera zoomed in on the sad pile of meat that Lisa had become. The episode ended abruptly, and when I saw a pale figure staring back at me from the suddenly dark screen, it took a half a second to realize it was the sweating image of myself. Episode 9, Contrition, was next, and there was no question on whether I would watch it or not. I needed to know what came next. I needed to know how this ended. Episode 9 was as different from the others as night to day. It was a shaky cam of someone walking through the woods by night. A butter-yellow light provided a small patch of illumination, and whoever was recording was breathing heavily as they trudged through the woods. The woods were preternaturally silent as they went, and the leaves crunching underfoot were loud enough to be jarring. The video was 4 minutes long, and 3.5 minutes were nothing but walking feet, crunching leaves, and heavy breathing. Then abruptly, they stopped before a small round stone, the ground before it freshly turned up, and put to rest sloppily. "Sleep well, Lisa," came the phlegmy voice of the cameraman. Then it all went black again. I hit the 10th episode before I could think about it, wanting to see how it ended. Episode 10, Ambivalence, seemed to be a return to normal. Dawn was sitting on the couch, seeming to laugh at something on the TV that was out of view. Michael and Steve seemed to be milling about, cleaning up or just chatting. The wall that had marked Lisa's room was nowhere to be seen. The Father Hand looked over all of them, benevolently, as the narrator told us about Michael looking for a book he had misplaced, and Dawn watching her favorite TV show. All seemed well. All seemed normal, other than the broken corpse of Lisa that lay on the floor. The damage that Father Hand had done still lay about the ground, and the meat was brown and dry. Flies had begun to circle the meat body, and if one of the puppets had to go near her, they seemed to walk over her body without noticing her. The only character who seemed to notice her was the Father Hand. He would look down at her from time to time, almost smugly, and shake his head before looking back at the other puppets happily. Episode 10 went dark, and I was yet again left wondering what I had seen. The video seemed to have moved into my head rent-free, in less time than it would have taken to watch a movie. I had moved on to other videos, other activities, but the images were never far from my mind. I'd been known to suggest strange videos to friends of mine, even link them on Reddit to certain groups. This one, however, was not one of them. I was hesitant to talk about it, let alone tell people about it. I did not want others to suffer under this like I had, and that was probably why I was thinking about it when I saw the poster. I was traveling for work. I work as an expert witness for specific cases, and I do a lot of traveling and a lot of waiting, which often leads to the aforementioned boredom. I was driving through Michigan when a call to nature became too much to ignore, and I had to pull over at a nearby rest stop. I was heading to the bathroom when I saw the missing persons wall. My eyes found the woman before I could stop myself, and my breath caught in my throat as I came up short. The woman's name was Elizabeth Rainey, 23, and she'd been missing for the last 4 months. The poster was new, unmarred by yellowing or creasing, and I pulled it easily from the bulletin board. Looking at her face, I realized how much had gone into each of those puppets. Her nose, her wide forehead, the small dimple in her chin, the dent in her left cheek from some childhood accident. They were all there. They had all been lovingly added to the porous face of that meat puppet. I took the poster back to my car, my check-in time approaching quickly, and called a friend of mine who works with the local police department. I told him about the girl, about the YouTube channel, about the videos, and he said he'd look into it without much enthusiasm. When he called me about a week later to thank me for the information, he sounded much more interested in what I had to say. I called him again a few weeks ago and offered to buy him a drink if he'd sate my curiosity. He was willing, but said I might not want to know as bad as I thought. Over drinks, he told me the whole sad story. My friend had a friend too. His friend was an agent with the FBI, and after watching the videos, my friend had called his friend. He sent him a link to the channel and asked him to take a look. After his friend had watched the drama for himself, he had tracked the IP to see what he could find. Turned out that Elizabeth wasn't the only familiar face that was missing in the Michigan area. Michael Chavez, Steve Schwote, and Don Lee were also missing from the same area. The IP address was coming from an old house near Lake Huron. The owner, David Matthews, owned the house and quite a lot of the acreage out there. When they had raided his house, they had caught David by surprise and found more than they bargained for. He had been keeping them in his basement. The sick bastard had a large finished basement with 4 separate rooms. The central room held a couch, a TV, and a large kitchen table with a small set for the show and a camera. The puppets were on a shelf nearby, their bodies gray and sagging off their clothes hanger bodies. The other implement in the room was a large, rusty meat grinder. A meat grinder with strands of rotting meat hanging from the spout. He had said flies had been thick in the room, and the sounds of moans had not begun until they started kicking down doors. Dawn, Michael, and Steve had been laying in their respective rooms. Most of them, anyway, my friend had said, taking a long pull from his beer. He sent me the photos of the crime scene. I wish to God he hadn't. Dawn had been in the room that had likely once belonged to Elizabeth. David had been in the room that had likely once belonged to Elizabeth. He'd been wearing her dress, the fabric badly stretched around his frame, and was sobbing in the corner. No matter what the agents had said to him, his response was always the same, his rocking making a strange grinding noise as his bottom slid over the concrete. He kept saying, "I shouldn't have played God. I shouldn't have made her sleep." Again and again and again. The others didn't say much of anything. He had scooped them to the bone, cutting off fingers and toes, arms and legs, so he could grind them up to make those damn puppets. He'd used tourniquets and animal tranquilizers to keep them alive. Michael and Steve were a little more than torsos, Steve having half a leg and Michael a little more than an elbow. Dawn was missing her legs, but her arms were thankfully intact. She'd only been in the basement for a month, and it seemed he hadn't had much time to take from her. They had gotten all of them out of there, and David Matthews, the meat man, was now in custody. "A real win for the good guys," my friend had said, his stare 1,000 miles long, though none of them will ever walk again. The men are in a catatonic state, and the girl only gibbers. But at least we saved them before he could finish his sick little play. They had yet to find Lisa's body, but he told me they hadn't given up yet. As I sit here, going over the facts as I write, it all just runs through my head like a rat in a maze. Every moan, every sob was this sicko harvesting his victims so he could replace the flesh of his precious puppets. I was an unwilling participant in this, watching and encouraging this sick bastard to continue. I want to forget it, but I can't. I may never forget what I saw in that short hour of my life. I may never forget the terrible knowledge that the meat man has invested in me, and I may find my curiosity sated for quite some time. I think my days of roaming YouTube and my boredom may be at an end. One more story, and then I think it'll be time to trade my laundry basket in for a sponge so I can start on these dishes. Let's learn a little something about a bit of fauna that you might want to look out for coming to a backyard near you. Let's hear a story about a man who lived in the hollow oak tree. None of us believed him. How could we? It was just so odd that it couldn't be true. I swear to you that it happened. I can't prove it, but I swear to you it happened. We all just kind of shook our heads, but the look on Roger's face should have been proof enough that he was serious. He just looked so haunted, like he'd seen something that would never leave him. Roger's a habitual drunk. He manages it well for work, but he's been a drunk since I met him in college. Not a social drinker, or a fun drunk either, but a hardcore alcoholic. Like I said, he keeps it under control so he can hold a job down, but From quitting time till he passes out, Roger is drunk and in his own world. The story he told us happened in the park last night, and the way he told it made me think that while he was telling it, he might be stone sober. Roger had been off that day, so, of course, he's headed straight down to McGrady's at 11, just as the other day drinkers were starting to sober up. He drank his lunch, met us for shots after Ryan and I got off work, and then left about 8 when the bartender told him to stop smacking the jukebox or get the hell out. Roger, very drunk at this point, had staggered out and gone to the park across the way. He intended to sit for a minute and wait for his head to stop spinning long enough to pick up a fresh bottle and start drinking at home. I was sitting on the bench near the little pond, you know, the one across from the hollow oak tree. I had nodded, knowing just what he was talking about. The hollow oak is kind of a landmark in the town. Guys from the agricultural college had tested it a few years ago and determined that it was 80% hollow on the inside. They were at a loss to say how it stayed in the ground, but it did, and people sometimes came to take pictures. The city had set up a little chain perimeter around it, and you weren't supposed to touch it or disturb it in any way. So I'm sitting there, watching the sun go down, and night begins to settle, when I see this guy come out of the tree. We had asked him if he meant someone had been, up in the tree or leaning against the base of the tree. But Roger just shook his head and repeated that the guy had been inside the tree. It's like he had floundered with his words for a minute before settling on, you remember when you were a kid and you played with Play-Doh? You had that thing that would squeeze the clay through a little hole and make, like, spaghetti or something? Well, it was kind of like that, except way, way worse. He said it had started with an arm. At first, Roger had just thought it might be a squirrel or a bird, but when the finger gripped the bark, he began to think he might be hallucinating. The arm pulled its way out of the knothole, and pretty soon, a pale shoulder was sticking out too. The shoulder stretched and turned, and when a head followed, Roger said he almost screamed. He was certain he was hallucinating then, sure that the sauce had finally cooked his brain, but he doubted even his mind could create something like this. The tree pushed the person out, head and shoulders, knees and toes, and the man had hit the ground on all fours like some kind of spider. He scuttled across the grass under the chain. When he got to the edge of the barrier, he started making gagging noises. As Roger watched, the man had thrown up a dozen small somethings and then scuttled to the other corner of the barricade to do it again. He had done this 3 more times, upchucking into each, and when he looked up from the 4th round, he had made eye contact with Roger. The man's face, he said, had been confused but not afraid. He was looking at something unfamiliar, and when he smiled, Roger felt his breath catching his throat. The man's teeth were pointed like a bunch of sewing needles, and the look had been far bigger than Roger's pickled brain could understand. The smile looked painful, too big, like he could have swallowed me whole. Roger had run then, run all the way home. That's where we'd found him last night, passed out on the floor and mumbling in his sleep. I finished my coffee and told Roger that he better get ready if he wanted to ride to work. Roger said he wasn't going in today, though. He'd told the boss he didn't feel well, and I told him I'd meet him at McGrady's after work. He had shaken his head at me, mumbling about how he'd never go back in that bar again. I think I might be done with the sauce for a while, he said, his voice shaking like a leaf. I rolled my eyes and left for work, expecting I'd find him drunk when I got to the bar that night. When I got to the bar at 6 o'clock, though, he was nowhere to be seen. The bartender said he hadn't seen him all day, but asked me to remind him that his tab still needed settling. I asked a few of the regulars, and they said they hadn't seen him either, so I stepped out of McGrady's and found a familiar shape sitting in the park. I walked up to Roger and found him stone sober, sitting on the same park bench he had told me about in his story. "Have you been here all day?" I asked. Roger nodded as he stared at the tree. I had never seen Roger this way, and it kind of scared me. I'd seen him sober before, and I'd seen him drunk plenty of times. But this was different. He was like a different person, someone who's seen something he can't comprehend, and I felt sorry for whatever it was that was going on inside his head. "You were serious about that thing, weren't you?" I asked. Roger nodded, his eyes boring into the tree like he meant to melt it. I wanted to walk away, but I found myself sitting down beside him instead. My morbid curiosity had gotten the better of me, and if this creature was real, then I wanted to see it myself. So, we sat like watchers in a theater, waiting for the show to begin. It wasn't a short sit either. 6 became 7, 7 became 8, and 8 became 8:30 as we sat watching the sun sink lower and lower. It was high summer, and the days were long. Just before 8:30, the sun became a burning coal on the horizon, and the two of us tensed for what might or might not be about to happen. As the darkness settled over us, I sighed. Good one, Roger. Got me to waste my whole afternoon on this nonsense. Come on, I'll buy you a drink, and you can have a good laugh at me about how you... But he grabbed my arm then, pointing at the tree with a shaky hand. I looked back, and a long pink worm was beginning to make its way out of the knothole. It's just a worm, Roger. You got drunk and hallucinated something that scared you. I'm glad you're using it as an excuse to get sober, but don't ask me to buy into your delusion. Does that look like a worm to you? He asked, his voice shaking. I glanced back and saw that it indeed no longer resembled a worm. The one worm had become 5, and they were attached to a pale pink hand. The hand had unfurled from the hole like an alien flower, and as the wrist made its way out, I realized that the show had begun. The wrist emerged, and behind it came an arm and an elbow. The shoulder was next, and as the tree sprouted a man, I found myself unable to look away. He came slithering from the knothole, this boneless creature in human flesh. It was like watching dough being pushed through a press, and I wondered how it could possibly do this. When his head came free, it looked like nothing so much as a helium balloon being inflated. How? I gibbered, my mind refusing to understand what it was seeing. How can this be? If Roger knew, he never answered. The two of us sat mesmerized as we watched this fully grown man come slithering from a gnarled hole too small for a squirrel to fit into. He hung from the opening when it was down to his legs, a caterpillar ready to slide from his cocoon, and he hit the ground on his back before flipping over gracefully and scuttling on all fours towards the chain-link fence. When he opened his mouth, a spray of small somethings came spilling out onto the ground. They were black, looking like the smooth river stones you sometimes buy at a hobby store. He threw up about 20 of them before scuttling to the other corner. He repeated this operation 4 times, and as he opened his mouth for the 4th time, I saw the double row of pointed teeth in his oddly large mouth. He looked up after seeing us, and just as Roger had said, he smiled before scuttling back into his tree and pressing himself back into the hole. It was like watching a blow-up doll deflate in slow motion. First his arms, then his shoulders, then his head, then his legs. Before long, his feet were disappearing grotesquely back into the cramped little opening. By the time he was done, it was almost 9, and I felt as though my brain had been awake for days. That probably sounds weird, but when you see something like that, something that just doesn't make sense, your brain tries its best to make it fit into the picture of the world you know. Birds fly, fish swim, and this man compresses himself in and out of a tree so he can throw up. I stood up then, and Roger grabbed my arm. Don't do it. If you look, you won't be able to stop yourself. I pulled myself away from him, wanting to see what it was. I needed to know. Why did he come out to throw these things up? Were they bugs that were killing the tree? Were they some kind of sickness he had to keep purging? Why did this thing that defied logic come out of this tree just to throw up these whatever they were? I bent down, taking out my phone as I shone a light on the pile closest to us. I gasped. I couldn't help myself. They were acorns. Solid black acorns that were about 2 sizes too large to be a normal acorn. I reached down to pick one up, but my hand froze before I could touch it. I stood up, wiping my hand despite it having touched nothing, and offered to buy Roger a drink anyway. After what we had seen, I thought we both probably needed one. No thanks. I think I'm done with drinking for a while. Maybe you ought to come home too, he offered. We ended up heading home and just watching TV for the rest of the night. Roger hasn't had a drop of alcohol in a month, and I still find myself dreaming about that strange creature once or twice a week. It'll fade in time, but I want to get it down here so other people know. Given what happened yesterday, It's information that people might need. You see, the news reported that the Hollow Oak had gone. No one had seen it go, but the patrons of McCrady's had speculated that it must have been between midnight and 5 a.m. when the bar closed. Many of them had seen the old tree when they came inside, but reported that it was gone when they left at 5 a.m. after last call. But never fear, local botanists have reported that a small sapling has already sprouted in the spot its predecessor occupied. There's no evidence to suggest it might also be a hollow oak, but this reporter certainly hopes so, the man on the TV had said. I'd like to say this is where it ends, but unfortunately, there's a little more. You see, I couldn't get those strange acorns out of my head. I kept thinking about them, wondering about them. So the night before the hollow oak left, I went and watched the man as he went about his strange and disgusting ritual. Once he had gone back inside his tree, I went to the pile and took one. I put it in my jacket pocket, and now it's sitting on my desk. It seems to draw my eye, the little acorn almost appearing to beat like an infected heart. And my mind tells me to plant it in the ground. Roger told me that if I touched it, I wouldn't be able to help myself. And I guess he was right. I don't know how much longer I can stop myself from planting this thing, but I fear what might come tumbling out one night if it grows. So if the hollow oak should happen to land in your town, don't touch its strange occupant's acorns if he should come out to deposit them. I wouldn't interrupt his strange ritual either, not if I were you. The occupant seems harmless, but those teeth must be for eating something. And just like that, I think it's time for us to say goodbye for the day. Oh, but don't be too sad. I'll be back again real soon, with more cozy horror and more great stories, with me, Dr. Plague. So, until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.